Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this special live broadcast today brought to you by Zero Waste Scotland on the forthcoming ban on certain single-use plastic items in Scotland. My name is Catherine Bozek and I work in the communications team here, and I'll be hosting this live Q&A panel discussion this afternoon. It's great to have you with us. If you are joining live, then please do get involved by submitting questions and comments on the live feed for whichever platform you happen to be viewing on, or you can tweet us using the hashtag single-use plastics ban or the hashtag plan for the ban. Or if you prefer to drop us an email, please do so at supd@zerowastescotland.org.uk. We'd love to hear from you with your questions and comments. Now, just to give you some time to get those questions into us, and there have been some sent in already, I'd like to ask our guest panel of speakers to introduce themselves to us all. So if I could start with yourself, Sarah.
Hi, Catherine. Thank you. I'm Sarah Archer. I'm in the policy team at Zero Waste Scotland, and I'm here to help explain what the regulations mean for businesses.
Thank you, Sarah. And yourself, Susie? I think you're on still mute, Susie.
Hi, folks. My name's Susie Fitton. I'm a policy manager at Inclusion Scotland, and I'm here to talk about why there's an exemption to the ban on plastic straws to maintain access to plastic straws for disabled people because they are a vital accessibility aid.
Thank you, Susie. It's great to have you with us. And last but not least, Chris.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Chris Mcrae. I'm the marketing manager for Oscars Group. We are a family-run business in Portobello, Edinburgh, and we operate bars and restaurants. And I'm here to talk about how, from the business perspective, we'll be preparing for the new regulations.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks to you all for being here today. It's great to have you with us. So yeah, as I said before, please get involved and start putting in your questions to the comments. That would be wonderful, and it would be great to hear from you. And just while we're waiting on some more questions coming through, a little bit of background as to the discussion today. So we all know we're here today to talk about the single-use plastics ban, which is expected to come into force on the 1st of June in Scotland. So that's just a couple of months' time. And we've all seen the really heart-wrenching images of sea life literally swimming in plastic. We don't have to venture too far outside our front doors on a lovely day like this and see litter spoiling the landscapes in the areas that we live in and work in Scotland. And we know that single-use items generally are a significant cause of litter. But more than this, they're also a significant cause of climate change because in Scotland, around 80% of our carbon footprint comes from the stuff that we buy and use and sometimes throw out after one use. So it's great to see that the Scottish Government is taking action by banning problematic single-use plastic items like cutlery, plates and stirrers and straws that are often found washing up on our beaches, that are littering our landscapes, and sometimes you can't walk down the street in the city centre without seeing one of those polystyrene takeaway boxes flying past you. So it's great to see that this intervention is happening. And some of the questions that we've already been receiving on this today are, what does it mean for us? What does it mean for us as Scotland, as citizens, as businesses? How can we prepare for the ban? And as Susie sort of mentioned, what does the plastic straws exemption mean and how will that be applied? So I'd just like to dive straight into the questions now, if that's all right, panel. And first of all, come to you, Sarah, as the sort of policy expert on this. What are the items that are to be included in the regulations? Could you please explain what those are and why those items were specifically chosen?
Sure, yeah. So the ban applies to single-use plastic cutlery, plates, drink stirrers, straws, balloon sticks, as well as to expanded polystyrene cups and food containers. And this means that businesses cannot supply all of those items, and that applies whether they're handing them out for free or whether they've got a charge attached to them. And the regulations also ban the manufacturing of some of these items. However, they don't, for example, ban the manufacturing of straws because we still need to allow for the supply of those via the exemption, and we'll come on to the exemption specifically for straws in a moment. And it covers items whether they're recyclable, whether they're made of recycled plastic, or whether they're made of compostable plastic. So it covers all those categories. And we've set them out on our website. So that list of items, you'll be able to find them on our website, the Zero Waste Scotland website. And the Scottish Government have published guidance, so you can go and check through that list if you haven't managed to scribble them all down just there. And you asked why they've been chosen. So these items are within the EU Single-Use Plastics Directive, and Scotland's committed to aligning with that. And they're the most commonly found items of plastic on beaches and in marine litters across Europe. And clearly plastic is really durable, it's really versatile, and it's used really widely. And these properties make it really valuable for us. And we use it a lot in our everyday lives, but these properties, this kind of long-lasting nature, also make it really damaging for our environment. And in Scotland, we see 9 out of 10 of the top 10 items found on beaches contain plastic. So the focus here is really on plastic for those reasons, but I think it's also worth highlighting that simply replacing those single-use plastic items with an alternative single-use item made of a different material can replace one set of environmental impacts for another. So yeah, kind of this is part of a way to tackle Scotland's throwaway society and move to more circular society where we can be prioritising reuse and keeping items in use for longer.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. It's a great opportunity to shift away from single-use items and move towards reusable alternatives as much as possible. Just to bring the straws exemption to the forefront for this next question, you mentioned that as a critical exemption that will be applied as part of the regulations. How can straws still be made available through this exemption? Where will they be able to be accessed? If you could maybe answer that, Sarah, and then we could come on to Susie.
Yeah, so the exemption applies, so it allows catering businesses, so cafes and restaurants, for example, to still be able to provide single-use plastic straws for people who need them. It allows pharmacies to continue to supply them, so individuals or somebody on their behalf can purchase them for use at home or elsewhere. And then there's a small number of other establishments like schools and care home and childcare centres, and the list of those are in the guidance, and they'll be able to purchase straws to supply to individuals who need them. And lastly, health professionals, so that would cover hospitals and other medical settings. And there are a few conditions which it's worth being aware of. So for example, they need to be made available on request, so they shouldn't automatically be handed over or offered out. And they should be kept behind a counter, so out of reach of customers. But and Susie can talk about this more in a moment, but it's really important to note that customers don't need to provide any proof that they require a straw, because that essentially kind of prevents access to people who need them to getting them. We've developed guidance and toolkits to help businesses understand how they can apply this within their setting, and you can have a look on the Zero Waste Scotland website for that.
Thanks, Sarah. And Susie, just from your point of view from Inclusion Scotland, why is it so important? Our viewers might not realise that single-use plastic straws are made available as a vital accessibility aid. What is it about single-use plastic straws that makes them the only suitable choice in this regard?
So I think one of the important things to realise is that alternatives to single-use plastic straws are not always suitable for some disabled people. So paper straws can disintegrate in hot food or drink and can be a choking hazard for some disabled people who may have a sensitive bite reflex or swallowing issues. And we know that glass and metal straws are very inflexible. One of the reasons that single-use plastic straws are such a vital accessibility aid is because of their flexibility and the fact that you can position them very easily. Whereas glass and metal straws are very inflexible, and they can also be a burn risk for disabled people who need to have a straw to eat hot food or to drink hot drinks. We're often other alternatives are often talked about. So pasta straws or bamboo or acrylic straws can also be very inflexible. And they can be hazardous for disabled people with neurological conditions who might experience muscle spasm or shakiness. Silicone and other straws require cleaning. Metal straws require cleaning as well, and that can be impossible for some disabled people to do. It can be very difficult for them to do. And one of the things that isn't often realized is that bio-based plastic straws can contain allergens for some disabled people, such as latex or gluten or shellfish residue. And for some disabled people, those allergens can be extremely dangerous.
Thanks, Susie. Thanks for explaining that so articulately. I mean, certainly I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily be aware of all those risks posed by other types of straws, so it's really important to outline clearly why this exemption is so important, and thanks for doing that for us. Sarah, you already covered what businesses can do to make these available, and there's a toolkit available, as I understand, on the Zero Waste Scotland website, fully on the single-use plastic legislation, but also on the straws exemption, which is so important. So now I'd like to take the discussion into a different area, into how this impact will be on businesses. And in order to start the discussion off, we've actually prepared a video. We went out and about in Portobello in Edinburgh earlier this month and did some video recording with 3 businesses who are already taking steps to shift away from single-use items in their hospitality businesses to more reusable alternatives. And one of those businesses is joining us today. So you will see Chris from Oscar's Group featuring 2 of his businesses in this video that we're about to show. So this will last about 4 minutes, and then we'll bring back the discussion and we'll have some more Q&A on what we've seen.
Hola, my name is Álvaro Bernabeu. I'm the owner of the Malvarosa restaurant in Portobello. The Ditching Disposable trial is encouraging people to use containers that they have to return to us rather than disposables. In order to encourage them to do so, we charge them a deposit. We give them back the deposit when they return the container. Currently we are charging £1 for the coffee cups and £2 for the takeaway containers. If the customer doesn't bring back the container, we don't lose any money there. From that side of the business, actually, it's cheaper because the containers we buy, they're being used, and if they are not returned, we just cover the cost of it. We have been reducing the usage of single-use items like straws, for instance. We don't use any sachets or things like that because we do things in-house. But I think the more people get involved, the easier it will be to get over potential teething problems. The reason why I got involved in this project is because I believe we can do things better. It's something I'm passionate about, and I like to do my little bit about it.
We have got involved with the Ditching Disposables campaign since around about December last year. For us, what we're trying to do is reduce and, hopefully in the future, eliminate all disposable items. We are encouraging all of our customers to bring their own reusable containers and reusable cups for their hot drinks, and we're offering them discounts in order to do so. In the next few weeks, we're hoping to trial a deposit return scheme.
I'm here to get some fish and chips, and I've got my reusable pack along with me here, so I'm going to try this out and see if it's going to work for hot food. I think it certainly should be something that, we're morally obliged to look at various options now. We can't avoid it.
Disposable packaging is incredibly expensive. From a business perspective, it can only be a positive thing that we're looking to reduce our use of those. It's very apparent to us the effect that disposable waste can have just on a day-to-day basis. I'm very aware walking down the promenade in Edinburgh, we feel we've got a moral obligation to set a trend that hopefully, perhaps the rest of Edinburgh can follow suit. We've had a lot of help from Zero Waste Scotland and Changeworks. Absolutely, the support is there. You're not on your own. It's very much it's a group effort. This venue right here, we're right beside the beach. Any waste that we're letting out there as a business is going straight towards the sea. I think it's important to note that we don't have a takeaway here at the business, but that's not to say that we can't get involved with a scheme like this. The biggest change that we've made so far has been switching from disposable sauce sachets to reusable sauce bottles. So immediately for a business like ourselves, it's apparent, we've got thousands of customers a week that, we're putting thousands of sauce sachets out there into the environment and into landfills, and also the price that it's costing us as a business is, it mounts up. So it's really a win-win for a business like ourselves to switch to something reusable. So at the moment we're using something like this, and we've switched away from these little sauce sachets. We're only using paper straws, but we know that that's not really going far enough as an intervention, so we're trialling out glass straws. It's certainly something we're looking into, is the possibility of offering a scheme whereby customers can actually buy reusable straws from us. Any advice to business owners out there, it's really just get involved, maybe have a look at the practices that you're doing already, try and think of any ways in which you can make those practices more environmentally friendly, in ways in which you can reduce the disposable items that you're using. And as we get feedback from our customers, we're realizing that we can push it further and further and try to really push for a culture change.
We're all coming back now. So yeah, that was a really insightful little video there, just highlighting some of the businesses that we're working with as part of the Ditching Disposables trial, which is encouraging a shift away from single-use items in food and drink businesses towards reusable alternatives. So Chris, thank you for taking part in that pre-recorded video there. I understand the Oscars Group operates a number of businesses in Portobello, and we just saw 2 of those examples there. Could you just explain the breadth of operations that you are running over in Portobello?
Yeah, no problem. So we've got 3 different businesses. They're all based in Portobello, so by the sea in Edinburgh. We've got the Boathouse, as you saw in the video, which is it's a bar and restaurant. We have St Andrew's Takeaway and Restaurant, which is basically a fish and chips takeaway or chippy, and a restaurant, and Oscar's Gelato as well. So that's an ice cream business and takeaway.
And I'm sure the ice cream business is doing a roaring trade on a day like today, so that's good for
yeah.
business. Could you maybe just explain to our viewers what prompted you to get involved in this trial as part of the Ditching Disposables project, and how it's gone so far?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we're always trying to be on the forefront, really. I think with things like this, we're, as I say, situated right beside the sea, so it's immediately apparent to us the effect that our businesses can have on the marine environment. I think as a society, we're all very aware at the moment of the effect that each of us are having with our carbon footprint, with COP last year and everything. So, we're trying to be as proactive as we can. We actually last year already eliminated all single-use plastics from our businesses in anticipation of this blanket ban. But yeah, I mean, I think for us, it's really, as I said in the video there, it's a win-win. So we're aware that we need to be doing more for the environment. If we see our packaging on the beach, it hurts us as a business, and we know that it's directly going and affecting marine wildlife. But yeah, we're just really trying to do everything we can to make as much of a change as we can in anticipation for this the ban, because we don't want it to be too much of a leap when it comes in June.
And how, as we saw one of your customers there at the Chippy taking her own container in to get some fish and chips, how have your customers generally perceived the recent changes that you've introduced? Has it been a positive thing?
Yeah, the response has been fantastic so far. I mentioned in the video there as well, it is a bit of a culture shock for people. Customers aren't necessarily um, used to bringing a reusable container to a chippy to take their food home. But the ones that have got involved so far, it's been fantastic. They're getting a discount on their food. It's saving us money in disposable packaging, and they can see that we're trying to do something really progressive here. So generally, the response has been really good so far.
And if I could just also ask you from a business operational perspective, have there been any challenges from shifting away from single use to reusables that you'd like to discuss?
Sure. I mean, when it comes to hot food in a takeaway environment, the quality of the food is obviously very important, and disposable packaging is designed specifically to be breathable enough for hot fried food to be taken away and to keep the quality of food as high as possible. So I think this is a challenge that we're currently facing. We're trying to work around. So whether or not Tupperware that people have at home is going to be absolutely perfect, it might not yet be the case, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. And what we're trying to do is find reusable and breathable containers as an option that we have ourselves that maybe we can offer to customers in a deposit return scheme like Albaro is doing, or something similar.
That's great. It sounds really positive. Sarah, is there anything you would add to that on some of the challenges of shifting away from single use to more reusable containers?
Yeah, and it's really interesting hearing from Chris to hear what the challenges are and how they're tackling them. So I think it's always great to get that insight. And I think it's certainly something we hear a lot of at our end, because if you think about the kind of how we've set up our food service businesses over the past decade or so, they've really been designed for that convenience side of things, to take food away in that single use container or cup, whatever it is. And that is going to be a challenge for businesses to make that switch. In some cases, it's about thinking how to incorporate the process of washing and drying of containers or whatever it is within operations, so whether that's using spoons instead of stirrers. And Chris mentioned some examples as well about the reusable food containers. And so, yeah, that does require some consideration and some planning. But as we're hearing already, businesses are demonstrating that switch to reusables is possible. And I saw yesterday in the news that SECC in Glasgow is making a switch to reusable cups in their operations. So it's great to see examples like that springing up. And I think we'll just begin to see more and more of them. So I think there are challenges for businesses about that, but we're seeing how they can overcome them.
That was actually one of our questions on the social media feed that's just come in. I see a lot of single-use plastic. Do you think businesses are prepared for this? I think we've kind of touched on that. And also Martha's wondering how we're working with local authorities on this issue. I don't know if there's anything you could say in response to that, Sarah.
I'm not sure I've got anything specific on that, but the guidance that has been developed by the Scottish Government to articulate and kind of explain the regulations which are coming in, and the work we've done in order to help businesses implement those changes, I think will be useful when local authorities are speaking to businesses within their regions and helping them make those changes. So I think kind of as a package together, there's the information out there, and we're certainly through events like the webinar today and the comms we've been doing around this and social media, really working to raise awareness for businesses, and hopefully that's something local authorities are also able to help kind of spread that message.
Thanks for that, Sarah. And Chris, if I could just come back to you for a second. We talked about straws in your video there, and we've got Susie on the panel from Inclusion Scotland. Could you maybe talk us through the straws exemption from Oscar's Group's point of view? What are you doing? What steps are you taking to implement that exemption on your premises?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, it comes down to really trying to make it as easy for the customer as possible, so that they don't feel like it's a big deal. If an individual has a disability or a reason why they need to use a plastic straw, and I guess we're not going to be as part of the ban, we're not going to be displaying them, so they will have to ask staff. We want to make that as easy an interaction as possible. So one thing we are doing to smoothen that out is we're bringing in a drinks ordering app next week, and as one of the options on that, so when the customer is making their order, they'll have just a little checkbox. They can select if they would like a straw or not on that. So it basically takes the difficulty out of the situation for the customer, and hopefully it's a lot more respectful.
Susie, is there anything you'd respond to on that idea? Sounds like using technology is a good thing for this.
Absolutely. I think one of the key messages that I'd like to get across today is that it's not about disabled people being obstructive. Climate change and the impacts of climate change and the impacts of environmental degradation can be very significant for disabled people, and many disabled people want to tackle throwaway culture and they want to tackle plastic pollution. So it's not about being obstructive or not caring about the planet or the environment. It's simply about single-use plastic straws having a particular purpose for some disabled people that cannot be replicated by alternatives. And to listen to Chris and to hear him talk about his business making the request system stress-free and easy and straightforward and not burdensome or stigmatizing for disabled people is really, really heartening and really, really positive, because that was really why Inclusion Scotland put together a panel of disabled people who use plastic straws to try and advise and support Zero Waste Scotland to create an exemption to the ban for this particular purpose.
And it's great to see that coming to fruition now, Susie, so thanks for mentioning that. If we could just turn to some of the questions that have been coming in quickly here. We've got one from a parent-teacher association group. Sarah, this might be one for you. They have some plastic catering items left over, and their next events that they're planning to use them at is after the 1st of June. What will happen to these items? Are they still allowed to use these after the 1st of June, or would that be unlawful for them?
That's a good question, and obviously I'm not sure of the ins and outs of the particular setup of that parent-teacher association, but these regulations apply to businesses, so they apply to the supply of those items in the course of a business. So if you're within the course of doing it within the course of a business, yes, then as of the 1st of June, you'll no longer be able to distribute those. If you're not a business, then you can still use those items, so you can still use them up because you're not doing so in a business setting. Obviously, you won't be able to purchase any more because those businesses supplying them will no longer be supplying them. But yeah, if you've got leftover items and you're not a business, then yeah, you're able to use those up.
So the same thing would go for my mum then, if she's got leftover plastic plates and cutlery at home that we never got to use in parties during lockdown, she's able to use them after the 1st of June.
Yeah, so long as she's not setting up her own little business to do so, and you're having it for your family. Yes,
that's good. That's good to hear. Another question, perhaps one for Chris and Sarah, from a business point of view and a policy point of view. Someone's asking what could be used outside instead of single-use plastic glasses. Now, I know they're not subject to the ban unless they're made of expanded polystyrene, but nonetheless, it's a good question because we are trying to encourage a shift away from single-use as much as possible. So, Chris, do you have any experience of that from Oscar's group in your outdoor?
Yeah, absolutely. So, sorry, beer gardens in particular, are required not to use glass outside. So it was an issue that we had. So a couple of summers ago, we were using single-use plastics outdoor, and yeah, the wastage was incredible. So we did try to look for other alternatives, as I say, when we got rid of single-use plastics last year. So last summer, we found there are reinforced plastic cups and glasses. You can find them in all shapes and sizes: pint glasses, cocktail glasses, wine glasses, champagne flutes, and they're dishwasher safe. So the options are out there if other business owners are looking for something.
Thanks, Chris. That's really helpful. We've also had another question in how long do you predict stopping the use of single-use plastics will take to become the cultural norm? I mean, this is a huge part of the behaviour change that we're trying to instill as a society. Is that one you could perhaps answer, Sarah?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it kind of neatly puts these regulations, this new ban into context, because actually it's about also about kind of reducing the littering of these items and preventing the use of them in the way that we talked about before, but it's also about getting that cultural shift. So we should see it as part of a change to our throwaway society. So by itself, this isn't going to make that change, but it's a step change. It's getting us used to it. It's like with the single-use carrier bag charge, I guess, that came in several years ago now. Kind of at the time, it felt like, oh, how are we ever going to do that? But actually now, whenever we go out to the shops, we remember to take our bags. So yeah, it's part of that cultural shift away from single-use. And clearly some items are easier to do than others. The items here all have alternatives that can be switched in, and it will take time for that to apply in other places. Cups and food containers, as Chris was just talking about, is another example, and something which is going to be kind of next on Scottish Government's list of items to begin looking into. So we've talked about, or we've heard about applying charges for cups, and looking at different ways that you can incentivize reusable food containers. So I think it's all part of a kind of a wider picture alongside businesses looking at packaging. So the Scottish Government is working alongside the UK Government and devolved administrations to look at an extended producer responsibility scheme, which is essentially making those people who are producing packaging and are able to think about the design, making sure they're thinking about where that packaging ends up, so they design it in a way where that packaging can either be reused or can actually be recycled. So it's all part of a bigger picture to kind of get us to really think about how we're consuming materials and how we can make items last for longer.
Maybe just thinking of the bigger picture, we've actually had a few questions and comments about the rest of the UK and what's happening on single-use plastics at a more UK level. Could you outline the picture there for us, Sarah?
Yeah, sure. So England's already introduced some restrictions on some of the items, so the straws and stirrers, for example, and held a call for evidence earlier this year, which closed earlier this year. So they're also looking at them. Wales equally held a public consultation towards the end of 2020, and Northern Ireland must, as part of the EU-UK withdrawal agreement protocol, they need to apply these new market restrictions. So activity is happening elsewhere in the UK on these items as well.
That's great to hear, Sarah. Thanks very much. And in terms of enforcement, there's been a few questions on the enforcement of the regulations post the 1st of June. What will happen if you see someone continuing to use single-use plastic items that are subject to the ban after June? And who's responsible for the enforcement of the regulations?
So as mentioned before, this applies to businesses, the regulations, and it's down to local authorities to apply the enforcement. So that would come under the trading standards side of things.
Okay, thanks very much. Just looking to see what other questions we've got coming in. You mentioned about single-use carrier bags. So just to be absolutely clear, because someone's asking, they have a shop, what should happen to those after the 1st of June? But as you rightly stated, that's subject to the single-use carrier bag charge that was implemented some years back, and that's not changing, that's correct?
Yeah, that's changing. So it's only the items that we were listing at the start which will be subject to a ban, and it's worth going back onto our website if you want to get that full list of them. We note them out there.
Okay. Another question for you. Sorry, I seem to be finding them all at you, Sarah. There's one about compostables. I mean, isn't switching from single-use plastics to compostable solutions the green solution and the environmentally friendly solution that businesses should be going for? There's been a couple of questions on that, and what can be done to make compostable packaging more recyclable at a domestic level. So I don't know if there's anything you could share on that.
Yeah, that's something that we get asked a lot about, and it is a fairly confusing area, I guess. So to be clear, the regulations apply if to compostable plastics as well. So if an item is labelled as compostable and it's plastic, then it would be restricted. And I guess the reason for that is that these are still single-use plastic items. They still have that kind of longevity and the issues associated with the fossil fuel or the more traditional plastics. And there's still issues in terms of getting them into waste management systems. So it's difficult to get the single-use traditional plastic versions into waste management, but equally with compostables, it's not any silver bullet to that. So there's challenges in terms of, I think you just mentioned it, that they need to go into industrial composting facilities. So it's not as if you can chuck them on the ground and they magically disappear. There are home composting certification, specific home composting certifications that are beginning to emerge, and I think the jury's potentially out as to kind of how effective they are. My compost heap at home, for example, is not very well managed, so I would not trust my skill in composting those items. But I guess the key message is the kind of the take-home point is that single use is single use, and as I was saying at the start, switching from one single-use item to another single-use item doesn't kind of magically make all the issues disappear. Quite often you're simply changing one set of environmental impacts with another. So whether it's carbon, whether it's water use, whether it's land use, there's no simple answer, which is why we're really keen to see that shift towards reusable and keeping items in use for longer.
Thanks, Sarah. That's really helpful. And then we've had a question about, a slightly technical question about something called the UK Internal Market Act and how that might affect the ban in Scotland. Could you maybe explain how that affects things, Sarah, for our viewers?
Yeah, sure. So the UK Internal Markets Act would effectively exempt any items that were produced or imported via another part of the UK. However, the Scottish Government is in discussions with the UK Government and the other devolved administrations to explore how best to manage this. And we've got a link on our website setting this out, and we'll continue to keep that maintained and updated. And it's included in the Scottish Government's guidelines if people want to get really technical and start delving into the depth of that.
Thank you. A question from Suzanne on Facebook. How will the single-use plastics ban work with bottled water? I'm assuming she's asking whether bottled water, because that's another whole issue of single-use plastic or bottles that can be recycled. How that's not part of this legislation, but maybe you could explain how that might work with deposit return.
Yeah, so that isn't included within these market restrictions. So the restrictions aren't looking to ban bottles or bottled water. The bottles will be caught up in the deposit return scheme, which I think you've just mentioned there. So that's about placing a deposit, a cost associated with those bottles, so that when you finish drinking your bottle of water, you can take it back and you can retrieve that bottle. And that's all about encouraging us to really think about what we do with that bottle when you've finished with it, and how you can make sure the material from that bottle then gets returned so that it can be remanufactured and recycled into a new bottle of water, for example. So yeah, bottled water are not part of these current restrictions.
That's great. Thanks for clarifying that, and I hope that answered your question, Suzanne. I'd just like to come to all of our panellists, actually, because we've had quite a lot of comments that, this legislation is a great step forward for Scotland, but is it enough? Are we doing enough to tackle our throwaway culture? So, Chris, from a business perspective, what is your take on the regulations that are coming into force?
Yeah, no, I think they're fantastic. I think it's I don't know if we ever really should be saying that we're doing enough. Obviously from a business perspective, it needs to be achievable, and because Oscar's Group have been trying to slowly implement some of these things already for the past year or two, it has been easier for us to get on board, but I'm aware that other businesses might find it quite difficult. So I think it's a step in the right direction, but once the 1st of June passes, we shouldn't be resting on our laurels. So yeah.
So the sky's the limit. What's next for Oscar's Group?
Quite right.
Susan, if I could come to you with the same question, are we going far enough with this? What else could we be doing? And
So
what's-
I think it's a really important set of steps, really, in order to tackle throwaway culture and create a more circular economy in Scotland and tackle particularly plastic pollution in the marine environment. I think these regulations are really important. I mean, obviously, Inclusion Scotland's coming at it from an equalities point of view and a strong feeling that we don't want, particularly the ban on plastic straws, to discriminate against disabled people or cause them additional disadvantage. Disabled people have a fairly long and tortuous history of trying to request things that are not widely available to other people. So things like keys for accessible toilets or more assistance to get on trains or whatever it happens to be. And they also have quite a long history of having quite difficult experiences with service providers and businesses. So in terms of accessibility, so we were very keen to support the work of Zero Waste in this area to try and get an exemption to the ban that was workable for disabled people and workable for businesses as well. So that it wasn't complicated or difficult to understand. And that the materials were there to help with training and to help with communication around the exemption. So yes, we're very keen to ensure that disabled people's needs are incorporated at the beginning, at the design stage of environmental policy, and this is a good example of where they have been.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Susie. And coming to you, Sarah, on what your take is on the single-use plastics regulations and what might be coming next, or what you think should be coming next.
Yeah, so for us, I think the priorities coming next are certainly the cups, which we've talked about, and the food containers, and really thinking about how businesses can put in place measures to reduce our consumption of those two items. Scottish Government have previously flagged up that they're looking at how a charge can be applied to a cup. And I think as society, we're kind of further forward when it comes to thinking about reusable cups. I think there's more work to do when it comes to food containers, and Chris had some good examples earlier of the challenges thinking about kind of the materials that they use, and I guess there's other things about the kind of the size of the boxes. There's all sorts of bits. So I'm really interested to see how that discussion pans out and work with businesses to find viable solutions to that. And equally, picking up on Susie's point, working with non-businesses as well, so whether that's from a qualities perspective, whether that's environmental groups, so really getting a really broad conversation early in the day when we're having these conversations to make sure we're thinking about these issues from lots of different angles. And I think the other point I'd like to make is that it's really great to hear examples which aren't waiting for government action. So Chris has already mentioned things like those switching the sauce sachets for the ketchup bottles. So just switches like that, and hearing that businesses are making the changes proactively rather than sitting. And that's all really helpful to hear from our end of things, because then we get to learn what works and what doesn't work as well. So yeah, I think it's an exciting time ahead.
Let's face it, there's nothing more annoying than one of those sauce sachets when you're in a hurry to get your chips. So I'm all for bottles, much better. We've had one time for one more question that's come in from Martha. Big chains and coffee shops using plastic lids for coffee and things. If compostable lids are part of the ban, what will these chains have to do?
So yeah, that's a good point. So the ban is this regulation is only applying to expanded polystyrene food containers and their lids. It does apply to, but if so it's expanded polystyrene cups only. It won't apply to your non-expanded polystyrene. So the kind of the paper, plastic lined cups and their lids as well. So yeah. Just to be clear on that, it's expanded polystyrene only.
So for now, the coffee shops can still use those types of lids, but we would prefer them if they could introduce more incentives for encouraging reusable alternatives. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I think that brings us to the end of today's live discussion on the single-use plastics regulations that are coming in on the 1st of June. Thank you to everyone who tuned in at home, whether that be in your home office or out in the garden, because it is such a lovely day. It's been great to have you with us. And if you are watching on Catch Up, this webinar is being recorded and is available on our channels, and want to submit a question that we haven't covered today, or we didn't manage to get to your question, we will get back to you as soon as possible. And you can submit questions at any time using our email address, supd@zerowastescotland.org.uk, or you can get in touch with us on our social media channels. So thank you very much to Susie, Chris and Sarah for giving up their time today to discuss these important issues, and thank you all for tuning in. It's been a pleasure.